I'm now going to introduce you to Michael Kretzmer. Michael Kretzmer was born in Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe, to parents of Lithuanian Jewish background. He studied law and literature at Witwatersrand University in South Africa, and then he did an LLM at UCL in international law. After university, he worked as a journalist, eventually becoming a travel writer for the Sunday Times and a director and producer for BBC, ITV, and Channel 4. Michael has created an amazing, noteworthy documentary called J'accuse. It commemorates the Lithuanian Holocaust. 79 years ago, 2,400 Jews of Burj, a small, pretty Lithuanian town, were murdered and thrown into a pit. This included no fewer than 30 members of Michael's family. Unfortunately, today, there is a new form of Holocaust denial that is gaining ground across Eastern Europe. It's characterized by the dishonest rewriting of Holocaust history, and nowhere more cynically developed than in Lithuania. So I'm honored to introduce Michael to you and have him share his insights into both the past and the present. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for allowing me and Sylvia and Grant to address you in this way. I really appreciate your coming on a Sunday morning, and I'm sure it's sunny in San Diego, but I do feel this is an issue of huge importance, and I'm very grateful, as I say, to Pam and to Franklin for making this arrangement possible. I'd like to start by asking you to imagine the following hypothetical scenario. Imagine if Germany set up a pseudo-academic institute for the study of history, employed 120 pseudo-historians, sacking every historian that didn't agree with their ideology, and then on the basis of that bogus scholarship, decided to rehabilitate Eichmann, suggest that there's no real proof that he was a murderer or that he arranged the murders of so many people, and then set about making him a national hero, with schools named in his honor, with roads named after him, and with statues everywhere. Of course, this is impossible to imagine because Germany would never do such a thing. It would be utterly unacceptable. Yet, what Lithuania has done is exactly the same. I accept that the scale is different, but the nature of it is exactly the same. And the insult of it for the Jewish people is exactly the same. So I guess what this is all about is how we in the Jewish world, and indeed the Gentile world, should respond to this phenomenal insult. Of course, it would be easiest to do nothing. We Jews, as everybody here knows, are forward-thinking. We don't like to look back at tragedy and depend on that for our identity. We look forward to a future when we can work hard, where we can raise children, where we can raise societies and institutions that contributes to the good of the world. That's one reason for doing nothing about this. Another reason is who needs the pain? We don't need the pain. Who wants this pain to go back into the Holocaust? As all of us know, it is excruciatingly painful to relive these events, to remember our humiliation and our impotence and our suffering at the hands of these terrible people. And finally, Lithuania supports us these days. It has great relations with Israel. It is one of the few countries in the European Union that supports Israel. And in every synagogue on earth, certainly in Australia, Canada, the United States, South Africa, you can be sure to find a Lithuanian ambassador snooping around, telling us how much he loves the Jews and how much Lithuania misses its disappeared Jews. Well, I want to set us right on that one point. They weren't disappeared. They were murdered, and they were murdered by Lithuanians. And it is unacceptable that things should have come to this, where they publicly honor our mass murderers. So I and a number of people, I'm a latecomer to this party, But for a number of years, there have been a growing body of very noble dissidents who have rejected this Lithuanian narrative and are resisting it. And the reason for this, we can know... sorry, I beg your pardon, I just lost my place there. It is the fact of this Holocaust denial is an insult, and it should force us to recalibrate our relations with Lithuania. Let me briefly tell you my story, how I got involved in this. Well, for the first 66 years of my life, I never studied the Lithuanian Holocaust. But 3 years ago, I was obliged to, when a cousin of mine offered me the opportunity to come to a town called Birge, which was mentioned in Pam's opening, and attend the consecration of a memorial, which attempted to name the victims and enable us the chance to say Kaddish. So I went there, and it was a remarkable occasion, really. There was a march with about 200 people of a town of about a few thousand people to the death site. The memorial was unveiled. The shroud was lifted from this memorial, and I found myself staring at literally dozens. I mentioned to Pam 30 relatives, but actually there were scores of them. And I suddenly realized that this was the missing link in my own family. This is what happened to my family. They were all murdered. I think there were 3 Kretzmers that managed to survive the murders in Birge, and those are the ones who went to South Africa and created the family that I grew up with. So what I did was I decided I'd make a film about this, because this is my only skill, really, is to write or to make a film. So I made a film about the events in Birge, and it was a sort of schmaltzy and I think fairly naive documentary. What it did was it paid tribute to the leaders of this journey who have this project to name the dead people of Lithuania, the dead Jews of Birge. In fact, there are 200 mass murder sites in Lithuania, and there are only 4 where there are any names at all. All our names have been murdered, along with our lives and along with our property and along with everything we built up over hundreds of years. All has been lost in Lithuania. And so my film was called The Lost Names of Lithuania, and it tried to make sense of this and tried to make sense of the project to once again reinstate our names. Of course, this is going to be an impossible task, because there has been a deliberate policy of trying to forget our names in Lithuania. But anyway, on the basis of this film, I was then approached by Lithuanian TV to make a big glossy theater film about, it was going to be called My Letter to Lithuania, and it was to tell the story. So I started on this project, and I then became aware of this groundswell of resistance to the official narratives. And I'd like to mention a few people who've contributed to this. The first is Professor David Katz and his excellent website, defendinghistory.com. And if none of you have been on it, I would really recommend that you go on it. It's a wealth of information, and it talks about this double genocide theory of Lithuania, whereby I'm sure Sylvia will talk about this, where Lithuania says, well, we were the victims of the communists, then we were the victims of the Nazis. Poor Lithuania, the little innocent party in the middle that was persecuted by both peoples. And for them, for many Lithuanians, Jews, remember, are synonymous with communists. So we are the aggressors. We are the people who terrorized Lithuania. And so therefore, poor little Lithuania suffered both our aggression and the communist aggression. And they did suffer the communist aggression. There's no denying that Lithuania has suffered a great deal in its past. But this articulation of the problem is absolutely absurd, and the website Defending History points this out very well. Then there's Ephraim Zurov and Ruta Vanagaita, who together wrote a book called Our People, which is a very interesting read, and I would encourage people to read it. My interest, though, coalesced around 2 other people. One was Gochin, and the other was Sylvia Foti, for reasons that will become apparent when they give their presentation. But one thing all of these dissidents raise is the behavior of the Genocide Center. I alluded to this false historical institute, this hypothetical one of Germany. Well, in Lithuania, it is called the Genocide Center, and the job is to basically create a false history, a historical narrative that allows them to not only tolerate, but to celebrate many people who were responsible for the mass murder of the Jewish people. So anyway, I started this film, and I started understanding the wider parameters of what was going on when I suddenly realized that I was not being allowed to write what I wanted to write. You know, in the Anglo-free world, in the Western world, film producers are allowed to write what they want because we have a free press. In Lithuania, I was told that anything to do with the Jews was to be written by the Genocide Center, and I was because I was not an expert, I was not allowed to write a word about the Jews. I was, however, allowed to be as creative as I liked. Thank you very much. Of course, I responded to this with a 2-word email, the second word of which was yourselves. I think you know what I said. I then set about making my film and writing it. The film is called J'accuse. And of course, it's a deliberate evocation of the story of Dreyfus and Zola. And it is an indictment of what is going on in Lithuania. And to tell this story, I used 2 phenomenal people, Gochin and Sylvia Foti. I want to talk about why I wanted to do it. And it is to do with the issue of Jewish honor. Now, I know the whole idea of honor is a rather perverse concept in the world today, but this relates to the way we were treated, particularly to the torture, the rape, and above all, the humiliation and dehumanization that we suffered. There were 3 stages to the Lithuanian slaughter. The first was after the Soviets left and before the Nazis came, when Lithuanian nationalists, and it was a small part of the Lithuanian population, we must remember this, but they ran riot. This was the age of demonstrative cruelty, of theatrical cruelty, of beheadings and dismemberments, of mass rapes that led to murder, of dragging Jews with beards round the streets tied to a horse so they would die from their injuries in this way. The second stage was the incarceration of us, where we were either put into ghettos or into large synagogues. But even here, there was a very careful and deliberate cruelty, the purpose of which was to dehumanize us. In my view, and I don't know what Sylvia thinks with this, I suspect she agrees with me, the determination that we should be dehumanized was important as murder itself. Dehumanization was absolutely essential to this whole process. I guess it justified the later murders. But for me, this dehumanization is what has to be addressed. When we say never again, we usually refer to the physical right to life, that we will fight, and we will, I know we will. And we have Israel, and we have proud, strong Jewish communities. But in my view, never again must mean something else, that we will never again be humiliated by these anti-Semites, and that any attempts to humiliate us will be met with a sharp response. And Lithuania deserves this sharp response today, because by making people like Jonas Nareka and there are many others, national heroes, once again, they repeat this dehumanization. So I made this film, which is now almost finished, and I hope many of you will be able to see it, but it addresses these problems. And if we could now just show the trailer. This is a 7-minute summary of the film, and it'll give you an idea of what I'm saying it and the way I'm saying it. Thank you. So I think somebody's going to run the film. Am I correct? Pam? Pam, are you there?
Michael, you are.
Oh, God.
No?
I sent you the link. I didn't think I've never done this before. I will try.
Okay, then I'll find it.
Okay, I sent you and it was downloadable. I don't know if you were able to download it.
I can run it.
All right, Grant.
Who were these poor Jewish girls forced to strip naked before their slaughter? We shall never know. Their Lithuanian murderers didn't just rob them of their lives. They also took their voice. This film will be that voice.
It's terrible.
Lithuania, a land of Jewish bones, torture, rape, mass murder, everywhere. Stories so terrible they can barely be told. These are the Jews of Plunga. In June 1941, these people were brutally driven from their homes and imprisoned in the synagogue in the town center. Over 1,300 people who were incarcerated here for almost 3 weeks in the summer heat. No food, drink, or care of any kind was offered. Many died of thirst, hunger, suicide, murder. Inside, bodies decomposed. People went insane, and their torment only ended when on July the 15th, the survivors were dragged out in groups to nearby forest sites and butchered. Babies and small children were buried alive or had their skulls smashed against trees to save bullets, a practice common throughout Lithuania. This was the man in charge, a Lithuanian nationalist called Jonas Nareka. This is where he lived during the slaughter, in a stolen Jewish house right opposite the dying synagogue. This is the booklet he wrote, Lithuania's own little Mein Kampf, demanding the elimination of the country's Jews. These are his signed orders for the imprisonment and deportation of the Jews. This is a man who murdered perhaps 14,500 Jews, who led an empire of robbery, humiliation, torture, rape, especially pedophile rape, and cruelty almost beyond human imagination. And today he is a public hero in Lithuania. What would these poor girls say? They would say that this is unacceptable, an insult to the Jewish people and the victims of the slaughter. And they would cry out that the world, Jewish and not Jewish, has a duty to respond to this enduring, unnecessary, and dehumanizing insult. We are going to respond with the truth. The truth about Jonas Nareka. The truth about the depravity of the killings and the overwhelming voluntary participation of thousands and thousands of Lithuanians. And the truth about Lithuania's government, the world leaders in manufacturing Holocaust lies and defending Holocaust mass murderers. Fortunately, there are people telling the truth. There is Granddaughter, whose family was murdered in Lithuania and who has been bravely fighting the Lithuanian government for years through the courts. And there is Sylvia Foti, an extraordinary woman whose story we are privileged to tell. Because Sylvia Foti is the granddaughter of Jonas Nareka, the man who slaughtered Granddaughter's family.
The level of cruelty is depraved. Essentially the darkest, most sadistic side of humanity possible. And for me to be part of that, at least by heritage of blood, is so painful. I want to disassociate myself from it. And the only way to overcome it for any Lithuanian is to accept this truth and finally come out with it and face it. That is the only way to cleanse.
How should Jews react to all of this? Here you've got a perpetrator nation telling us that their national heroes are the people that murdered our families. Where is our humanity? Where is our dignity? Where is our self-respect? For Lithuania to come look me in the face and say, we love you, but our biggest national hero is the murderer of your family, it's an insult. It goes to the core of our being. Either we have self-respect and we tell them we will not accept these deceptions, or we sell our families and say it's of no consequence. It is of consequence.
Our doomed girls have one final question. Does the Holocaust matter anymore? Every year the world says it does. Frau Merkel says so. Monsieur Macron says so. NATO says so. The EU says so. Often. But if Lithuania can hero worship mass murdering Jew haters and lie about their guilt in a most sinister and deliberate way, then how can the free world possibly win the battle against ethnic, racial, religious, and anti-Semitic hatred?
This is the truth, and it has to come out. What Lithuanians did to the Jews has to be faced by Lithuanians themselves. And my hope is Lithuania is not the only country in this position. There are other Eastern European countries just like this. Maybe Lithuania could be the leader in this to do it, the way Germany was the leader all those years ago. But in this round, I'm coming to terms with it. Lithuania should be the leader.
The brutality of the killings and how pervasive they are demands a response. They demand truth-telling, because this level of cruelty can never be repeated in the world. If we do not identify this and call it out as inhuman, it will happen again.
Well, firstly, I must apologize for the technical quality of that. I don't know what you guys could hear over there, but for me, the audio was shocking. So I hope you got something out of that and got some understanding. I can assure you the original version is a lot more polished than that. But as long as you understood what we're trying to say in this film and how we're trying to say it, I think we've made the point. Just so you know, my film is going to be premiered at the Jewish International Film Festival across Australia in October and November, and in all places, basically, where there are Litvak Jews in the months after that. So I'm very much hoping you will get an opportunity to see the full film. I'd like now to introduce the two people who are going to speak now. The first is Grant Gochin. He's a wealth manager based in LA. And for over 30 years, Grant has been fighting the Genocide Center and the Lithuanian government through the courts. He has launched probably dozens of legal actions, all of which he's financed himself, trying to force the Lithuanian government to justify its behavior. All his legal cases have failed because there's never been an attempt to address the substance of his cases, and all have been rejected on the narrowest, most tendentious of legal grounds. Grant is an unbelievable person. He works 24/7 on this. He works every single day of his life on this story. And for much of this time, he's been entirely alone, working away by himself, receiving all manner of abuse, not just from Lithuanians, but very often from Jews too. But he has indefatigably gone on with it. And he is, for my mind, a true hero of this movement. He was alone for many years, and then 2 or 3 years ago, something quite miraculous happened when he managed to find a partner to work with. And that partner in his campaign for truth was, of course, Sylvia Foti. How can I describe Sylvia Foti? The best description that I can come up with is from the Bible, because Sylvia really is an Eshet Chayil, a woman of worth. In some ways, the Lithuanian diaspora is similar to the Jewish diaspora. The Lithuanian community is also inward-looking, insular, very proud, with a huge history, very sensitive to criticisms, very sensitive to anything that might undermine their reputation and integrity. And Sylvia was born, she'll tell you her own story, but she was born a Lithuanian princess because of her grandfather. She inherited the job of writing his official biography from both her mother and her grandmother. And faced with this obligation, I ask you, what would you have done if you suddenly discovered that your grandfather, who you loved and revered, was a mass murderer? Well, what Sylvia did was to go for it. She had the most more moral courage than any other person I've ever come across, and she was prepared, for the sake of truth and for the sake of a moral response, to go against her family, her people, her country, and her background. And she did this not for personal cost, because she got very little out of it. In fact, she suffered hugely for it. She did this because it was the right thing to do. It was a moral choice, a clear moral choice, and it's cost her enormously. So for me, Sylvia is the true hero of this occasion. She is the one who can bring truth to this occasion, and she can also offer a redemptive path forward for Lithuania. So without further ado, may I hand over to first Grant Gochin and then Sylvia Foti to tell you their stories. Thank you very much.
Okay. Michael, am I on? Okay.
You are.
I can't hear you, Michael. Is my sound on? Okay. So my story is as follows. I grew up in South Africa, like I imagine everybody else on here. And my grandfather was almost unique in that everybody else's family kept quiet about the old country. And every single time I was with my grandfather, he spoke about the old country. And he imbued me with stories about the old country. And he implored me, when I was old enough, to go back to the old country, to say Kaddish over the graves, to see if there were any survivors. In those days, there were sanctions against South Africa, and no South Africans were allowed to travel to the Soviet Union. So he knew that he would never get back to Lithuania. So he gave the task to me. And I took the task up, and I went back to Lithuania, and I restored the family cemeteries, and I said Kaddish, and I uncovered Jewish history. And one day I was with a historian in my grandfather's shtetl, and there were 3 killing fields in the shtetl. And so all of my family must be within those 3 killing fields. And at each one, I said Kaddish. And I said to the historian that was with me, who did the murdering? I was under the impression at that point in time it was Nazis, because that's the history that had been published. And the historian looked at me without batting an eyelid and said, it was a man by the name of Jonas Nareka. So what do I know? I come back to the United States. I start researching. I want to know what could possibly make anybody go and murder a baby. What can make somebody go and murder a 90-year-old disabled woman? I mean, what is the mental process of somebody that hates so much that they would murder to that degree? I come back to the US, I start researching, and I discover that in 1984, 6 years before Lithuania even regained independence, the Der Spiegel magazine in Germany exposed that the murderer in this region was a man by the name of Jonas Nareka. 7 years after Lithuania regained independence. So this is 13 years after Jonas Nareka had been exposed as the murderer. Lithuania named him one of their primary national heroes. There was no doubt. There was the documents with their signatures on the documents, the eyewitness testimony, there was so much data already. So I thought, it's not possible. Imagine Germany erecting a statue to Adolf Hitler and saying, this is our national hero. Oh, what everybody said he did, he didn't do. So I thought, okay, all I need to do is go to the government of Lithuania and say, hey guys, you've screwed up. Here's the information, revoke the honors and take down the statue. And I just met complete dishonesty. It was just total, absolute fraud. So I thought, you know what? There's some bad elements within the government. The only way to do this is to go in front of a judge and say, there's no question as to the guilt. I need an intelligent, impartial, independent judge to just look at the documents and say, it's just completely obvious. Stop this, stop the BS. So I started my first legal action. In summary, I've had about 30 legal actions. My self-imposed task, I realized that this was Holocaust fraud. It was historical inversion, it was Holocaust denial, it was Holocaust revision, it was Holocaust distortion. It was an out-and-out Orwellian rewriting of history. So I set out, when I realized this, I set out to get different parts of the government on record. I have every one of their courts involved, on record, involved in this cover-up. I have the Prime Minister, the President, the Parliament, the Culture Department, the Heritage Department, the Genocide Department. It is a full-scale government cover-up of Holocaust perpetrators. I was alone. I was completely alone. No Jewish organization assisted me in this. And one day, I'm sitting at my desk in my office, and an email pops up on my screen. It was Adolf Hitler's birthday in 2018. An email pops up on my screen, and it says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin. My name is Sylvia Foti. I assume you know who I am." Of course, I knew who she was. I trolled the woman. She was the granddaughter of the man that had murdered my whole family. And I broke out in the sweat. My hands started shaking. I started getting these palpitations. I had a complete physiological response. I actually had to calm down. And so I emailed her back and I said, yeah, I do know who you are. And I am willing to talk to you, but I need a few days. And the reason I needed a few days is because I needed to calm down. So I make an appointment and I made her call me. And I'm really suspicious. All I've ever encountered from Lithuania is fraud, hostility, attacks. So she calls me and she says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin." And I make her call me Mr. Gochin because I'm not even going to reduce myself to telling her to call me Grant. So she says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin." And I'm like, "What?" And she says, "I've read all of your research." And I'm like, "Yeah, so?" She says, "You've made a huge error. And now I'm expecting the fraud to come." So I say, what? And she says, you've missed about 10,000 of my grandfather's victims. And with that statement, every bit of suspicion, all the anger, all the resentment just evaporated. And with that, why don't I hand it over to Sylvia and let her continue?
Thank you, Mr. Gochin.
I love you, Sylvia Foti.
All right. So my perspective's a little different. I'm just going to start, first of all, to explain that I'm the author of a book called Storm in the Land of Rain. It's the paperback version of the Nazis' Granddaughter. But Storm in the Land of Rain just came out 5 days ago. And it's a memoir. It's a personal account of how I came to terms with what my grandfather did. It's a literary narrative of what happened in Nazi-occupied Lithuania through the lens of one perpetrator. And it's a journalistic investigation, as I had interviewed at least 100 sources and had gone through at least 1,000 documents. So I grew up in Chicago, in Market Park, which was known as Little Lithuania then. And I grew up speaking Lithuanian. I didn't speak English until I went to kindergarten. So as Michael mentioned earlier, the Lithuanians had been and still are a very insular community. Most of my friends at that point were only Lithuanian. My parents' friends were Lithuanian. So I only had to start speaking English when I started going to American school. And as I was growing up, I always heard stories about my grandfather, Jonas Nareka, from my mom, his daughter, and my grandmother, his wife. And I always heard his story backwards, that he had died in a KGB prison in 1947 at the age of 36. So very young man. He led a rebellion against the Soviets in 1945 to 1946. And he was trying to round up all the partisans to fight against the communists. This is when he called himself General Storm, even though he was only a captain in the army. So he had gotten betrayed, and this is how he landed in the KGB prison, tortured well over a year, and executed with 2 bullets to the back of his skull. So he died a martyr for Lithuania's freedom. Before that, I heard how he was in a Nazi concentration camp from 1943 to 1945. Then I heard how he was head of the Šiauliai district, which was the second largest district of Lithuania at the time. From 1941 to 1943, this is during the Nazi occupation. Before that, he helped lead an uprising against the Soviets in 1941, and Lithuania won. So he has a high school, he has a grammar school named after him and streets named after him. There's a plaque on a famous building in Vilnius. In 1997, I had accompanied my mom to Lithuania, where she received, on her father's behalf, the Cross of the Vytis, which is the highest honor anyone can receive posthumously, and she had gotten it from President Algirdas Brazauskas. So, and the reason he got the Cross of the Vytis was because the Genocide Research and Resistance Center recommended it. They're the ones who, it was upon their recommendation, because they're the ones who really had supposedly done the research and had declared him a hero, worthy of being a hero. My background at that time was journalism. I had an MSJ in journalism from Northwestern University. And in the year 2000, my mom was dying. She was 60 years old, and I had grown up always watching her work on this story and wanting to write this book. But in the year 2000, she knew she had no more time, and I was visiting her, and she said, "Sylvia, you have to write the book." And of course, I was devastated because I knew she would never ask me to write that book, unless she knew she was dying. But of course, I said yes. And the very next day, she had gone into a coma and died within 2 weeks. So, I collected all the materials she had. Behind me are 3 bookshelves that came from her archive. It was 3,000 pages of KGB transcripts, 77 letters he wrote to my grandmother from the Stutthof concentration camp. He wrote a little fairy tale to my mom from the Stutthof concentration camp. So just lots of material for me to go through. In July 2000, my grandmother still was surviving my mom, but then she had gotten another heart attack, and now I'm visiting her. And as I'm visiting her, I take her hand, and she says, "Sylvia, how's the book going?" And I said, "I've started it. I'm starting to go through all Mom's material, and I'll get it done. I'm not going to let it go the way Mom did." And to my surprise, she says, "Don't write the book. Just let history lie." And at the time, all I thought was she was just trying to let me off the hook, because it was a rather insane deathbed promise to my mom. And I thought she was just trying to ease my burden. And again, I said, "No, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let it go. And I promised Mom I have to do it." And I thought I was really just comforting her. And she just sort of turned over and faced the wall. And I did not understand why she wouldn't like my answer. Anyway, a few months after that, and we're still in the year 2000, both my mom and my grandmother wanted to be buried back in the homeland in Lietuva. And so we brought their remains to Lithuania and we buried them. And then the next day, I was invited to visit with my brother, the Jonas Nareka grammar school. And it's in a little town in northern Lithuania. And, a kilometer away, we're driving there, and I asked them to stop the car because I see this sign that says Nareka's birthplace, 1 kilometer away. So it's kind of like a little tourist attraction on top of just being a regular school. And so we get to the school, and the children are holding flowers, and they're singing Lithuanian songs, and they're greeting us very grandly. And then I go into the director's office, and we start talking, and he says, "I heard you're writing the book, that you took over the project from your mom. You're such a good daughter." And I said, "Thank you." And I said, "As long as I'm here, why don't you tell me the story of how you named the school after my grandfather?" Because I had never heard it. And he said, "Well, before we had, the school was named after, a Russian hero. Because as you know, Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, and everything had Russian hero names. And so as soon as Lithuania got its independence, we wanted to name it for a Lithuanian hero. And your grandfather was such a magnificent hero and born in this town. And so it was a natural." And I thought that would be the end of the story. But then he takes me to the side and he says, "But I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather." And I said, "Grief from who?" And he says, "The Jews." And I said, "What could the Jews possibly say about my wonderful, magnificent grandfather?" And he looks at me like I should have known this. And he says, "Because he was accused of killing Jews." So that came as a complete shock to me. I was very unprepared. I had never heard this before. Nobody had ever mentioned this to me. Nobody said anything about this to me in Chicago. And my knees buckled. I had to sit down. I became very upset about hearing this, and the director could tell I was upset. And he starts stroking my arm, and he says, "Don't worry, that's all in the past. Everybody's happy the school's named after your grandfather now. And anyway, it's just communist propaganda. It's not true." So I go back to Chicago, And I talked to my father and other members of the Lithuanian community, and I'm like, have you ever heard this crazy story of Jonas Nareka being accused of killing Jews? And to my shock, they all said, yeah, we've heard it, but it's not true. It's just communist propaganda. The Russians someday are going to want to take over Lithuania again. This is always a constant threat that Lithuania is always facing. And they don't want Lithuania to have any heroes. So they just make up horrible rumors about them. And that's why it's not true. So being a Lithuanian from Chicago, and that, you know, that's what all the other Lithuanians thought, I thought that's how it is. But because my background was journalism, I had already decided that there's no way I can not address this and not face it. I'm going to have to somehow prove and exonerate my grandfather to clear his name. So that sort of became my new mission. When I finally started to get ready to investigate the Nazi part of the story, which became the whole story, I did come across a booklet that is in Michael's film called Raise Your Head Lithuanian. And this has become known as the Lithuanian Mein Kampf. He wrote it in 1933 at the age of 22. And he called for boycotting anything made by Jews. And, you know, he said things like, Jews in nice clothes sit in cafes thinking how to extract from us as much money as possible. Remember, when you sell a big thing to a Jew, you are doing harm. You are harming your brother, an ethnic Lithuanian. So it was like this for 32 pages. And again, you know, when I finished reading it, I wanted to burn it as his granddaughter because I still wanted to protect his reputation and Lithuania's reputation. But as a journalist, I knew that this was going to make my job a lot harder to exonerate him. And I still had a little thread of hope because he didn't call for the killing of Jews. And I thought this doesn't really link him, you know, necessarily to the Holocaust. It certainly displays his anti-Semitism, but that's one thing, not a good thing, but it's one thing. And so I still had a little bit of hope. But then I came across a document that he signed when he was governor of that Cholet district during the Nazi occupation. And this was the document that completely turned my life around. And in this document, he called for rounding up of all Jews and half-Jews in his region of Cholet. And he wanted them brought to SAJAC, where he asked for a new ghetto to be created, just to place them. And so more than 2,000 Jews were rounded up in this Cholet region, babies, children, grandparents, all the ages. And within 2 months, on Yom Kippur, they were all slaughtered and then buried in a pit in SAJAC. And when this really sunk into me, this is the document that finally convinced me that my grandfather certainly played a role in the Holocaust in Lithuania. And then I had to figure out, was it a willing role or an unwilling role? But I knew he was part of it. And so the whole book took me over 20 years to write because 10 years of it I went through the psychological denial of what he had done. It was very, very difficult for me to face what he did. And so this is why I do understand how difficult it is for Lithuanians to face this. And what a challenge it is. But I was very motivated in writing this book for all kinds of reasons. You know, at first I wanted to do it just to honor my mother because of this deathbed promise. But then when I started realizing what this story was and how really it seems like no Lithuanian really knew about the Holocaust and what happened. And so I really sort of took this on as a mission to tell the truth. And I thought, whatever comes out of this, I just want the truth to be told, as horrible as it is. So in the end, I was by myself. I was really carrying this all on my own shoulders. I was scared to talk about this with anyone. Because I knew if Lithuanians knew about it, they would try to stop me. So I kind of decided I wanted to just get it published in the United States. And in English first, and I set that as my goal. So I learned that he played a role in killing Jews in 3 cities: Plungė, Telšiai, and Šiauliai. And he contributed to 8,000 to 15,000 deaths under his watch. And then right around 2018, I became aware of Grant's work. And he had everything on the internet of what he is working on. And that's where I saw that he, at that time, said that my grandfather was guilty of only killing 4,000 Jews. And so my research was 14 to 15,000. And that's why I thought he was 10,000 off. And then I did connect with him, and I did call him, and we had that conversation. So it's been a very long journey. I have gone through a lot in writing this book. I don't regret it at all. I have faced a lot of criticism, but I have gotten praise too. And I am convinced that what I wrote is true. I think I was very thorough in going through this. I tried to make this as personal as possible because I kind of wrote it for Lithuanians in a way, because they're the ones who need the story in some ways more than Jews, because Jews know the story. It's Lithuanians who can't face it. And so that's why I wanted to make it as personal as possible to show them my journey and how I came to terms with all this. And I do have hope that Lithuania will someday take some more ownership of this. So I'm going to hold on to that hope. And I hope my book plays a role in that. So that's kind of my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and thank you very much, Grant. It was, as usual, a marvelous presentation, and we're very grateful to both of you for it. Sylvia, can I perhaps kick off the questions, which somebody's emailed me a question. Do you think Lithuania is ready for a redemptive path of knowledge? Or do you think things have gone on so long and so far now that you and us as well are fighting an impossible cause?
I think it's getting ready. I don't know how many years out it is, but I know when I first went public with my story in 2018, it felt like a big shock to all of them. And I'm going to Lithuania for the 3rd time this year to talk about the results of my book. They published my book in Lithuanian in February, so that to me is like a miracle. So I was joking that the book's going to get translated in every language but Lithuanian. So for it to get translated in Lithuanian was a big deal for me. A publisher took it on, and I'm very, very happy about that. I'm going back in 2 weeks, in less than 10 days, actually, to talk about my book to Lithuanian teachers teaching about the Holocaust in Lithuania. And they're all going to get a free copy of my book from the organizers who are putting this on, the Olga Lengel Institute, which I'm very grateful to them too. But I do see hope. Before it was one big wall of no way, and now I'm seeing some chinks in the wall. Some people looking at this more openly. There is a very strong, very nationalistic group, but I don't know. I have hope that it's going to happen.
If I may add to that
Michael,
question.
May I also answer that, please?
Of course, Grant.
Okay. So the Lithuanian government rewrote history. Sylvia's grandfather is just one of very many people that they rewrote into. They actually said that he was rescuing Jews. He wasn't murdering them, he was actually rescuing them. So I've been going to Lithuania for over 30 years. In that time, every single Lithuanian I have met has told me that their family was involved in rescuing Jews. But only 0.04% of Lithuanians are recognized as being Jew rescuers, which leaves 99.96% of Lithuanians who were either murderers, bystanders, or can't prove that they were rescuers. So the Lithuanian government had an entire program of rewriting the perpetrators into being victims themselves, and in extreme cases of being Jew rescuers. So the narrative that Lithuania presented was Lithuanians didn't see who did it. They don't know who did it. It wasn't them that did it. If there were Lithuanians that did it, it was the dregs of society. And history had been comprehensively rewritten. So there is a government agency called the Genocide Center. And this is really, really relevant. There's a Lithuanian government agency called the Genocide Center. Their abbreviation for that is LGGRTC. And I'm going to explain to you why I'm saying that in a moment. They were tasked with the rewriting and complete fraud of Lithuanian history. And so that's who became the target of the ultimate target of my litigation. The head of the guards at my Dane concentration camp was a Lithuanian named Baltusas. The government's position was he served on the outside of the camp, so didn't know what was happening on the inside of the camp. So he was completely innocent of the crimes. The government of Lithuania took a perpetrator by the name of Brazaitis, and they frauded US congressional documents to say that he wasn't that he wasn't a perpetrator. Well, this morning there was a very interesting. This morning I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you I can't anymore. This morning, there was a very interesting Facebook post from the government of Lithuania, how the government of Lithuania is contributing data to a communism museum in the United States. And this is exactly what their agenda has always been. Rewrite history, put it into education systems so they can rewrite themselves into a victim nation instead of a perpetrator nation. This morning's tweet that they produced is going to go to the US Congress because it finally exposes what their agenda has been the whole time. I'll go on to another tweet that they put out a few days ago. They sent their Deputy Minister of Defense to Israel to talk to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Their deputy minister is named Shemashka. Shemashka's grandfather was a murderer of Jews. Shemashka's grandfather has been rewritten into a rescuer of Jews. So the Lithuanian government presents Shemashka as the deputy minister of defense and tells the IDF how lucky they are that this man was a hero and rescued Jews. The deception is total. The Lithuanian Minister of Defense, his name is Anušauskas. Anušauskas used to be the head of the Genocide Center. Under Anušauskas's direction, the government of Lithuania actually accused Jewish Holocaust survivors of possibly having committed war crimes in order to survive. So here they are with an official program saying, if a Jew survived, you must have committed a war crime to survive, but no Lithuanian did anything other than try and rescue Jews. You know, and then they, not only are they rewriting this, but they're trying to teach this to our children. So what Sylvia and I have exposed, and Michael, what you've exposed in your film, is about one. But there are at least a dozen, and the level of deception goes to the highest levels of government, is trying to penetrate the US education system, and they are spewing deceptions even to the Israeli Defense Force. That's how pervasive this is, and that's how important this issue is.
Thank you, Grant. That's fascinating stuff. Sylvia, can I ask you, who should we Jews speak to in Lithuania? I find we cannot speak to the government or any of its agencies. We cannot speak to the museums or any of their agents. And all the people who are put up to be the face of Lithuania to the Jews are essentially part of the Genocide Center armory. Is there a way of reaching ordinary people who are, first of all, innocent, because in Judaism and in every decent legal system, guilt does not transmit intergenerationally. People are innocent there. We would like to go with them in a way of finding a redemptive path through this. But from my own personal experience, there is nobody to talk to because everybody has been conscripted into this net of corruption within Lithuania. Firstly, do you feel my perceptions are right? And secondly, is there an alternative to this?
I do feel your perceptions are right. And this is why, you know, when I had like 20 years to figure out how to get my book out, I knew that inside Lithuania, they would close ranks on this. And so my strategy was to get the book published with a really good publisher in the United States and build up as much publicity about it so that Lithuania would get the publicity from outside and it would start hitting that hard shell that they have. And so to me, Lithuanians almost in a way need to be shamed into it through publicity. And then they kind of start looking up and kind of getting up out of their shell and saying, what's this? That's how it's been working for me. And I think that knowing what I know, that's the only way to get through this issue. And I'm finding that this strategy is having more success than any other strategy has had as far as getting through to Lithuanians. There's still a long way to go, but I'm seeing this armor kind of dented because of the strategy. So and just like what you're doing with your movie, you're bringing this in from the outside in. I hope it goes more mainstream than just the Jewish groups. That's the thing. It needs to go mainstream.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's really interesting. Grant, conversely, can I ask you, what is the Jewish community doing to deal with this insult? I mean, my perception is that our community leaders often let us down. They're always making parties with the Lithuanians. Every time a Lithuanian ambassador comes, they bow and scrape and kiss his ass. And I don't understand this. I don't understand why we have such weak leadership. Firstly, is my perception right? And secondly, if it is, what the hell can we do about it?
Your perception is correct and it's incorrect. So there's two aspects to this. There's Israel as a nation state that needs Lithuania's vote at the United Nations. So Israel as a nation state represents living Jews. They don't represent dead Jews. So Israel as an independent national entity is required to cooperate with Lithuania and Lithuanians and to turn a blind eye. Jews, individuals, our NGOs have let us down. This is not a sexy subject. This is not something that is a fundraiser. This is not something that you can excite a base about. So it's easier for them just to accept medals from Lithuanians and appear at parties and put out press releases that they're having the conversation. On a superficial level, it makes it appear that they're trying to do something. But if you note, in 30 years, they've accomplished nothing, because our NGOs, many of them are in service to themselves or to fundraising rather than in service to the truth. So as Jews, we have failed. As Israel is required to not look at this. It's our job as individuals. And Michael, your movie, that's why your movie is so critically important, because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make people understand. I'd like to go off at a tangent. Leah Levin sent me a question: how do I feel about those that are seeking Lithuanian passports? Leah, the reason people are able to seek Lithuanian passports is much because of my work. Lithuania had a dual passport system. Non-Jews were to be accepted and Jews were to be denied. Those were my first 5 lawsuits where I exposed the no Jew citizenship policy. After I exposed the government of Lithuania the way we're exposing them now, they had to change the law, and Jews are now able to receive citizenship. I encourage every single Jew that is able to claim that citizenship. It is a statement to Lithuania: they didn't kill us all. We are not going away. We are not going to be silent. And we do remember our families. I absolutely encourage every single Jew to demand their citizenship rights. It is the one and only thing that Lithuania has of any value whatsoever that they can give back to us. Citizenship and truth. That's it.
I agree, Grant. Sylvia, can I ask you a more personal question? Because I've spoken to you so often, I'm aware of the suffering that you personally went through in this. You lost your daughter in the middle of this, your marriage broke up, and you were rejected by a number of people who had been close to you. How spiritually did you cope with this? Why did you keep going? I can't imagine it improved your mental health during this time. And what lessons perhaps can we learn of moral courage from what you've been through? Because I think very often it's very easy to say, no, this is too inconvenient. I don't need this in my life. How did you get through it?
Well, I am a practicing Catholic, and my faith is very strong. And I prayed over this book every day. And just one of my prayers was something like this. God, if this book is, if what I'm finding out is true, help me put it together in the best way possible to make an impact, number one. And number two, if it's not true, put obstacles in my way so that this book never gets out. And number three, if it is true, I don't know how I can get this book out. You are going to have to help me do it. I'll show up and do the writing. I'll do everything I can, but you're going to have to help me with the rest. And that's how I got through every day. I mean, those were kind of some of my prayers that I went through. And I feel like this book is a miracle that it came out. I really do. Just the constellation of factors that happened, me being the granddaughter, me being a journalist, my mom asking me to write this book, my grandfather having such a powerful story, and then all the media, I barely look for media attention. It all just comes to me. And to me, that's the hand of God. I don't know what else it is because I don't have a PR person. So to me, it's my faith. That's what always keeps me going. And, humans always fail me, but God doesn't.
Well, I think I speak for everybody here, Sylvia, when I express my gratitude to you, because as Jews, we can make no headway in Lithuania. There is such contempt for us. They couldn't care less what we think. But for you, they cannot avoid you. They cannot ignore you. So you are a great instrument for truth in this world, I feel. And I'm sure I speak for many Jews when I say this, and I thank you for that. There's a question from Franklin. He wants you to try and contextualize and explain the nature of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. To be honest, from a Jewish point of view, it's incomprehensible. We just don't get it, the extent. And it percolates through even into the current age. I've seen it in my own dealings with Lithuania, as has Grant. And perhaps you can explain this to us. We just don't get it.
I'll try. I mean, as you say, it's so incomprehensible. It's very difficult to wrap your mind about it, but I can scratch the surface. I know that there are many Jews who are poor and, without wealth and without means, but that is not the perception. The perception is that every Jew is connected to Hollywood and, has their finger on the pulse of what makes the world work and runs all the banks. And it's a horrible stereotype, and that just breeds resentment. And somehow they feel like they're being controlled. And that, of course, life is like that. There's very little we can control, really. It's how you handle it. And so I think this is one part of it. The other part is in Lithuania, and I think in Europe, the Jews kept themselves separate, maybe part willingly and part unwillingly. Like the Lithuanians wanted to be separate from the Jews, but the Jews themselves wanted to be separate from the Lithuanians. And they did have their own separate communities, different languages. They would live in the same city and call the same city by two different names. And I know even when I was writing my book, I had to get the Jewish perspective and the Lithuanian perspective because they were completely different. It's like two different stories of what happened in the same little town at exactly the same time. And it's like, it's very different. So I think it's just hate, resentment, and then in Lithuania, somehow every single Jew was labeled a communist. And there were many Lithuanians who became communists too, but somehow Lithuanian could forgive another Lithuanian for becoming, somehow they could do that. But if a Jew became a communist, that was unforgivable. So it was sort of a mass hysteria that I think overtook, I don't know what other word to give it. And they just, this was part of the Nazi propaganda too. And it fed into this resentment that Lithuanians had anyway. It kind of matched what they thought. And, I always label this anti-Semitism during the Holocaust like a iceberg. The tip of the iceberg was just that they were communists. That's just the tip. But the whole bottom of that was fed by all this anti-Semitism anyway. And that labeling them a communist just gave them license, just the excuse that they needed, the legitimate excuse that they needed to lash out and kill. And then to take over their property and, I don't know, keep it in their homes and pass it down generation to generation, I guess. I mean, I meet Lithuanians and they're like, I don't know how I got this, I don't know where my parents got this from. They got it from my grandmother somehow, and I'm not sure how she got it, you know. And then we talk, and then they're like, no, you know. So this is a very unscientific, not academic, historical type of answer, but I think it's part of the truth.
I presume, Sylvia, that a number of Lithuanians feel you are an agent for the Jews now because of what's going on.
They do. They think Grant wrote my book. I have 3 writing degrees. No, could I possibly write my own book?
That's an insult.
Sylvia, can I ask you a question? It comes from the chat. It's Franklin. Barbara, a close friend who actually runs our Holocaust Society here in San Diego, asked, have you had help from the Jews in telling your story in Lithuania? Have you and Grant collaborated? I can see what you and Michael and Grant have done through the movie. And by the way, kudos to the 3 of you. Just a phenomenal effort, and we are all deeply grateful. But how can we as Jews help you in your mission? I personally have been back to Lithuania with my wife in 2001 to see the history of our Jewish families who were exterminated there. And I had the privilege of speaking in Kovno to a group of urologists on a medical subject, but I never touched this issue of tell me what really happened here, which I was dying to ask, but I was uncomfortable. I didn't want to offend people who had invited me. And, can we help you? How can we help you?
Well, creating a platform to tell my story, any platforms available to tell my story, to help me tell my story is how to help. Like the Olga Lengel Institute, I'm just a high school teacher. I don't have a PR person. I spent easily over $100,000 of my own within the past 20 years in researching this. So, I need help getting in front of audiences to tell my story. And I think that that's the best way to do it. Media attention is the best way to do it. That's what I've been finding.
Well, maybe SAJAC can take the initiative, and I can discuss this with Pam and the organization if there could be some efforts to collect funds. And I think there would be people who would be willing to support how to get the story out and support you, because, for you to take this on and you, Grant, this should be more of a collective mission. And so, again, we all salute you, and let's see how we can help you.
I need a PR person.
Don't we all? I'd like to just respond to that. I want to just say thank you to everybody, because Franklin is a cousin to Michael, right? And so it's just this whole, grassroots connection of people that, for me, this is just the start of what it is that we can do. And Michael has a full-length documentary. So for me, that would be the next thing, certainly from SAJAC's point of view, and something that we could show and, just expose in a way that, and then there's the Jewish Film Festival, and there's the South African Film Festival, which I'm not sure, but I'm just brainstorming right now to say I'd be very, very happy to do whatever everybody thinks about in terms of how it is that we can promote it.
Pam, thanks. If I may make one more comment. When we went to Lithuania in 2001, we actually went to Latvia, because half my grandparents were from Latvia and half were from Lithuania. And we had connections high up, and without mentioning specifics, we met some dignitaries at the highest level of government. And we had just come from Rumbulas, which is just outside of Riga, where we witnessed where 32,000 Jews had been slaughtered in 2 days. And we saw many concentration camps, and we know the story of Latvia, which is no different from Lithuania. And we were told in no uncertain terms, thank goodness, there's no Jewish blood on Latvian soil. So this is not a unique story to Lithuania. I'm sure it happened in the Ukraine, Poland. I know there are people from other surrounding states. We have witnessed the worst atrocities throughout the Pale of Settlement. So I'm very supportive of what you're doing, and we'll do everything we can to help you.
May I interject for a moment, please? I'd like to tell a story about Sylvia that she won't tell herself. The bookcase behind her is of particular relevance. A few moments ago, I put a YouTube link for everybody to see. And if you would just bookmark that link and watch it later, it was about Sylvia's grandfather in Stutthof concentration camp. Sylvia had 77 letters written by her grandfather from Stutthof concentration camp. Sylvia was receiving hate mail, death threats, threats of violence, and she wasn't even worried about her own safety. She was worried about the safety and integrity of the archive, that be protected. She transferred ownership and possession of her grandfather's letters from Stutthof to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., to ensure that nothing could happen to them. I would ask everybody at the end of this Zoom to watch that YouTube to actually understand what those letters were about and the real life impact. I think it tells another aspect of the story of how much deception has actually gone on here. What do we need? What does Michael need? What does Sylvia need? What do I need? We need a PR agent for Sylvia. If the Lithuanian government is in active deception mode, they pretend none of us exist, and they hope that we will get bored and go away. If people are not paying attention, their wish will ultimately come true. I'm asking everybody to go to Costco in San Diego today or wherever you are and to buy a copy of Sylvia's book today. I'm asking everybody here to read Sylvia's book and to tell others to read it. If the Jewish community don't know about this, it will never be resolved. I'm asking everybody to watch Michael's movie. Michael set up a website, JeAccused.Lithuania.com, and just bookmark that so that you can watch his progress as he gets closer to releasing this movie. The story needs publicity. If the Holocaust, which is the greatest crime in the history of the world, can be rewritten and perpetrators rewritten into rescuers, and the Jews, the victims, insulted and denied, then any crime can do the same. If we don't address this as our own families, future genocides are going to be enabled. The very premise of Never Again is, in fact, Sylvia's book. This has to be addressed. Their falsifications of history cannot come into our education system and be taught to American children that murderers were rescuers. That's
great, Grant.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Grant. Sorry, I've just noticed that Sylvia has to leave by prior engagement. So I just wanted, before she left, to be able to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Sylvia, for coming and for talking to us and for doing the work you're doing. You're a magnificent woman. Thank you.
It's my honor to be here, and I'm no hero. The heroes are, to me, the Jews that suffered the Holocaust. They're the only heroes.
Thank you, Sylvia.
I'd like to say a personal thank you, Sylvia, and also to let everybody know that Sylvia offered 2 complimentary books to our viewers, our attendees. And so we did this not looking, in terms of where it was going. And I can tell you that it's Barbara Ostroff and Jackie Schneider that are the 2 people who'll be receiving a book from Sylvia. Thank you, Sylvia. And if you both can send an email to sajacsandiego@gmail.com with your addresses, I can forward it to Sylvia.
They need to be an address in the United States.
Yeah, I don't know. Are they?
Barbara's US.
Okay, and Jackie?
US.
Oh, there you go.
May I say one more comment about the film before I go? Before this meeting ends. You know, when one does a subject like this, it's very hard to find the voice you're using. There's Grant's voice, there's Sylvia's voice, there's my voice, there's Lithuania's voice. And this was a big problem in the making of this film. And suddenly it occurred to me that the one voice we really need to listen to are the victims, as Sylvia's just acknowledged. And that is the voice of my film. Now, of course, I have no right more than any other person to arrogate to myself the right to use the victims' voices. But I invite everybody to do that. And what you'll find is it's a very simple message. They want a very simple form of justice. They want acknowledgement and punishment for the people who committed these crimes. And it is now our duty, whether we support them or not. And that, I think, is what comes out of this meeting tonight. It's actually a very simple moral equation. And again, I must thank the people who organized this very, very much. I just hope that made sense. That's who we've got to feel we are representing in this campaign of justice. I made this film, to be honest, as an activist, not as a filmmaker. I am so outraged by this insult, and I feel we all should be. Thank you.
So if there are any other questions that need to be answered, Sylvia is going to have to leave us now, but Grant and Michael are still here. So Franklin, were there any other questions that people had sent in?
No, I just see lots of thanks and kudos to Michael, Sylvia, Grant. Thank you for your time, your effort. We applaud you. And thanks for sharing this information with us today. It was really spectacular, and we'll do what we can. And please, everybody, be aware, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, but I think this whole presentation's been recorded.
Yes, it has.
There are quite a few people who would like to hear it who just couldn't make it there's graduation ceremonies around the country. So friends of mine who'd like to hear it. So it'll be posted on SAJAC.com. Is that correct?
It will, and the attendees today will be, they will receive it in an email from us.
Yeah. So
Can I make a quick comment, Franklin?
Please.
Okay, so this is very personal to me. My father and his family, the Kremers, were from Vilnius, Lithuania. And he had about 250 members of his family members that were murdered or died of starvation in the ghettos and thrown into the Panari forest, including my grandfather and great-grandfather. And, you know, we went to Israel and then South Africa. And one of the things that my mother was a Holocaust survivor as well through Auschwitz. And one of the things was, of course, growing up in South Africa with apartheid, it depended which side of the fence you were on. So we always grew up in the home to say, you can never trust anyone. And part of the issue, I think, what's going on is, you know, my father fought in the undergrounds with the Russians, but then as soon as the war was over, he threw his medals away and he didn't want to have anything to do with the Russians. And I think part of the problem today is, like, which side were you on at which time of history? So I know, like, after the war, if you wanted to go back to Poland and reclaim your homes, where my mother was from, Ostrovich, the Polish took over your homes and they would kill you if you tried to get your home back. So, and the same thing, you know, with the history, who was a Nazi sympathizer and who was a Russian sympathizer. So depending on where you are on the fence. And I think the problem today is this nationalism and the patriotism. And when you talk to a lot of teenagers today, they only respond to what's immediately that directly affects them. If they directly affect it, then they're going to have a visceral response. But so it is a very complicated issue to navigate through all of this, because there's that part that's who did you identify with at a particular time? And so you've got the nationalists or the patriots in Lithuania. Okay, these are heroes. So it's kind of a common problem in Eastern Europe. And obviously what you brought out is in Lithuania is a far worse problem, whereas Germany has fessed up to accept their responsibility. And so now all these other European countries need to do the same, as an example set by Germany. So yeah, there's a big job that we have, but we have the Holocaust remembrance every year, and Barbara Ostrov is chairman, and I'm part of that committee. So I'm more than happy to suggest for the three of you to be our guests, if that's something they want to do for our next year's agenda. And then that's a beginning of exposure, I guess. But thank you so much for opening our eyes to what you're doing. And I so appreciate what you're doing.
Nova, can I respond to just some of that?
Sure.
You know, at every remembrance service, Lithuania sends their diplomats, and they beat their chests and they say, we lost our Jews, and we're so sad and we're so sorry that we lost our Jews. We don't know who did it, but the Jews are lost. Well, there's no Lithuanians going off into the forest looking for those lost Jews that are obviously out there wandering around, waiting to be found. You know, the Jews died. Well, you know, even if they died of starvation, that was deliberately enforced starvation, that's murder. The Lithuanian diplomats are out constantly rewriting history. So when you say history is complicated and there's multiple aspects to it, yes, history is complicated. And I mean, God knows, we know this from coming from South Africa, how complicated and how many nuances there are to history. But there are certain absolutes. When somebody like Sylvia's grandfather was a mass murderer, they cannot be rewritten into a rescuer. When the entire provisional government of Lithuania signed orders to create concentration camps, under the Nuremberg statutes, they are Holocaust perpetrators. So, you know, there was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. There needs to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for truth in Lithuania. So when you're presenting information at one of your Holocaust conferences, it's critically important that all aspects are raised, because what you mentioned is an absolute, and they depend on that. We can't control what Lithuania does internally. They can rewrite history for their own population, but when they export that and they're trying to teach US and South African kids a falsified history, if we do not counter that vigorously, then the murderers of our families will be rescuers, and it'll all happen again. So I hear what you say about kids and immediacy. If you explain to your kids that this is primary source material that is being introduced to their school and their university by a perpetrator government in order to miseducate, that is immediate for your kids.
May I interject there? I think what you've raised is really interesting, Tova. And I think there's a redemptive opportunity here. We both speak about this to Sylvia a lot, because they are the victims of this. The population of Lithuania is not guilty of anything. As I mentioned earlier, guilt does not transmit down generations, but they are being made to be guilty by the actions of their government, who then obliges its children to hero worship a mass murderer. And what I believe that what we can also offer them is a redemptive path out of this ridiculous situation that they have lied themselves into. I don't know how, but I think there should be a measure of kindness in our approach to Lithuania, but not at the expense of truth, because the defense of truth is in our honor, and we have a right to demand that, and I believe an obligation to. But I think you're right, it offers a fascinating opportunity for some thinking. And in Sylvia Foti, we have a truly redemptive character, a personality, who really can do something, I hope. I have to say, my own personal experiences of Lithuania make me deeply negative. But when, we're Jews, we always have to look optimistically and trying to make the best of a bad situation. So yes, you're right. We have to integrate these complexities into the way we try and go forward. But no lies. Those are not permissible.
But I'm wondering if this Ukraine war today, where now the whole world is experiencing what Russia's doing to Ukraine, if that has some kind of resonance of what war can do to people. So it's like they can actually see what's been happening, that maybe now people can relate to what destruction and devastation war can do to someone.
I'm reluctant to do that. The Lithuanian president came out and said what Russia's doing in Ukraine is worse than what Nazis did. Russia's not going and genociding 96.4% of Ukrainians. They're destroying and they're killing, but it isn't a deliberate genocide. The Lithuanian parliament voted unanimously to call what Russia's doing a genocide. These are all historical reference points to shift the focus on a true genocide that happened in Lithuania. So it's a constant process of shifting and revising. So until Jews ourselves believe that Lithuanians were doing the rescuing and nobody knows it was all the Nazis' fault, you can't sweep all the crimes under the Nazi rug. Mm-hmm. So I'm reluctant to make those comparisons.
Grant, I've got a question, related to what you just said. From my understanding, there were about 3,000 to 4,000 Einsatzgruppe, which were these Nazi units that were responsible for the murder of almost 1.5 million. So the Germans absolutely ran the show, but in collaboration, we know who we've been discussing, the collaborators. What has Germany said? You mentioned an article from Der Spiegel, if I remember correctly. But isn't this also on Germany to come up and say, we started this whole effort and we gave them, free rein to murder Jews? Has Germany done much about what's happened beyond Nazi control?
Franklin, I'm only going to talk about Lithuania.
Okay.
There were somewhere around 600 Nazis in Lithuania. The murders in Lithuania began before the Nazis arrived. The Nazis complained about the cruelty of Lithuanians. They said kill, but don't torture. And the sadism of the Lithuanians was even beyond Germany's ability to comprehend. The Holocaust, Sylvia's grandfather began the real Jew hate. Another one of Lithuania's heroes is a man by the name of Skirpa, who was the German ambassador to Lithuania, who proposed eliminating Jews. Now, he proposed the idea of eliminating Jews to Germany as well. The 80% of Lithuanian Jews had been eliminated before the final solution was devised. The Lithuanian government calls this an incident of anti-Semitism. Okay? They say he didn't really mean to eliminate, kill. He meant to eliminate as to shift somewhere else. So he didn't really do anything wrong. It was just misspeaking. Well, 220,000 Jews were murdered, and the actual murderers are their heroes. And they teach us to their kids. I mean, the school named for Sylvia's grandfather. Imagine your kid attending Hitler High School, okay? And then saying, well, you know, it was just an incident of anti-Semitism. Lithuania was unique. It was the testing ground for, can a local population be co-opted to do it? Where Lithuania and Latvia were different, in that the Germans were surprised at how ready the Lithuanians would murder, and they complained that it was hard to get the Latvians to start murdering. Once the Latvians started murdering, they got going good and proper. But the Nazis complained that it was hard to get the Latvians to get going. The complexities are unbelievable. What we have absolute certitude on is that Lithuania has an entire government division dedicated to Holocaust fraud, that through my approximately 30 legal actions, I have virtually every government department on record as a participant. If Lithuania, as the leader of Holocaust revisionism in the world, is not held to account, then we can basically rewrite the entire Holocaust history, and it didn't happen and nobody knew who did it. Lithuania is the most egregious rewriter in this field. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. No, absolutely. And, you know, one follow-up, Deborah Lipstadt. I mean, we all know Deborah, and she's fought Holocaust denial.
Yes.
You managed to have any contact with Deborah? Is she somebody who could help in her current position?
I am in contact with the State Department, has condemned Lithuania's Holocaust revisionism. Congressman Brad Sherman in Los Angeles has 3 times contacted the Lithuanian government saying you cannot use congressional documents for Holocaust deception. The Lithuanian government has blocked him and do not respond to him. I know that Congressman Sherman is in process of sending the file to Deborah Lipstadt to ask her to address that particular issue. Sylvia's grandfather is obvious. It's but the case where Brad Sherman is asking Deborah Lipstadt to help was actually using U.S. congressional documents for Holocaust fraud. I mean, it's inconceivable that a government could stoop that low.
Amazing. Well, you folks have touched on so many incredible facets of this complex narrative. And Pam, I think it's getting close to the hour. I don't see any other questions, but
I have a question. It's actually a statement. This is Joel Jacks, and I've been doing something with Michael Kretzmer about this. But the issue at the table, which we haven't discussed today, or that we have tangentially, we all understand now. Some of you haven't seen this before. What happened there? We all know what was done. We all know about Sylvia Foti, what Grant has tried to do. But what we haven't come up with is a plan to take this information and spread it around to embarrass, or whatever the word you want to use, the Lithuanian government. And so this is something that I've been talking to Michael for the longest time, but we don't seem to be able to figure it out. The best thing that I've been talking to Michael about is we'll show it to Jewish film festivals, Jewish film festivals is great to do, but that doesn't get it out to the world. We don't have a plan to get this thing out, and I don't know how to do that. And if there's anyone on this call that can say, if you really want to get some mileage on all the work that's been done here, this is the plan that you should do. And
Joel,
yes.
Joel, I'll answer that question. Sylvia Foti already answered it. So Lithuania has 2 Supreme Courts. They've both blocked me. Their parliaments blocked me, the president's blocked me, the prime minister's blocked me. There is no right to truth in international law. A government can rewrite whatever they want. The fatal mistake that Lithuania's made here is by putting out primary source educational material to miseducate US kids. This is our only actual avenue to go to Congress. The Congress has already recognized Lithuania's Holocaust revisionists. So is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, so is the State Department, so will Deborah Lipstadt. None of that makes any difference. The only thing that the Lithuanian government responds to is public shaming, and that goes to Sylvia's statement about a PR person. I am actively pursuing legislation in the US Congress to exclude Lithuanian academia from the United States. It is going to US Holocaust museums, and of which is one in every state, and telling them, do not allow the Lithuanian ambassadors or honorary consuls to come and misinform your audiences. The only path we actually have is educating from the Jewish community and then outwards. That's it.
Can I say, Joel, I thought that contribution was absolutely spot on. That's exactly what we need. We need to somehow use this knowledge we have and this commitment we have to try and effect change by bringing some discomfort to them. And what Grant says is, as usual, absolutely accurate. But I'm sure there are other ways of doing it. And we must be flexible in our approach. To be honest, if I was younger, I'd throw a few eggs. But I've got arthritis. So we probably won't go down that road, although I am a kind of fan, to be honest. But anyway, enough of that. There are many approaches to doing this. What we need is the gumption and the balls and the chutzpah to do it. And you're right, Joel, we need somebody to think of this, because I'm exhausted. I don't know what to think now.
Well, I think
anyway,
the best thing,
great contribution. Thank you.
Well, the best thing that I think that can come out of today is for the people on this call, and maybe others, can set up a group that can discuss this and come up with a plan with all of you in contributing, so that we can get something going. And I think, Grant, you've done an incredible job doing what you've done for God knows 30 years. Thank you for that. And so I'd be happy to be part of that group. I just don't have the skills. I can add up numbers. I don't have the skills.
Joel, if you can add numbers and listen, we are such an intelligent, creative, successful community. Among us, somebody's got the answer of how to hold them to account. Somebody's got the answer of how to have a Jew at every single meeting that a Lithuanian diplomat goes to and says, excuse me, what about Nareka? Between us, we can come up with a strategy.
All visits to shuls. There are a lot of visits to shuls. They must be challenged in shul as well. Sorry, Grant. Forgive me for interrupting.
I mean, I would love if you can put a group together and we can create some kind of think tank of how to address this. I mean, please tell me. There's only one NGO, there's only one charity that's actually gotten really involved in this. And it's a local in Los Angeles, Israeli American Civic Action Network, israelusa.org. He's actually not Jewish. He's a man by the name of Dylan Hosier that is now the leading political voice in the world for Holocaust integrity. We've got this in place, but we need ideas. I mean, Sylvia's done something remarkable. She's a very brave woman. At the end of the day, she's done more than virtually any non-Jew can do. But it's our families that are in those death pits. And it's our job to speak for the murdered. Joel, I love your idea of putting together a think tank of how we can do this, because as Michael says, he's exhausted. After 30 years, I'm exhausted. I've applied every idea that I can possibly come up with. I'm persona non grata. They won't acknowledge my existence. They invite Sylvia to the embassy and say, oh, yes, we really want to hear what we say, and then they throw the file in the trash. These are ill-intentioned people that have no intention of ever telling the truth. It's got to come from us, Joel. And if you can set up that think tank, I'm 10,000% in.
Grant, I just got a note from Barbara Ostroff, who's a close personal friend, who's a second-generation survivor and who runs our Holocaust Society here in San Diego. And she's very willing to, bring the subject up at the committee. So maybe we have an infrastructure in our local Holocaust Society to try and take on this initiative. So I think just getting towards, I think it's almost, 2 hours, Pam?
Sure.
Maybe we should final questions, comments, and then keep people apprised of what may come of this. But thanks, Pam, for allowing us to share it.
Oh, you most, oops.
Welcome. I'm really happy that we got to be able to do the presentation. I know that there's going to be a lot of...
Pam, you're muted.
And we couldn't hear you.
Franklin, she's muted.
Pam, you're apparently muted.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I just wanted to say thank you again, because this has just been such an amazingly important discussion. And it sounds like we're going to have a lot of motivated interest in pursuing whatever we can. I mean, a very, very, very active audience. So thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks. And thanks, Pam, for keeping SAJAC alive. We're the only existing SAJAC, I think, in the US. And, without this forum, none of us would be hearing these incredibly important stories. So thank you to you, because you've led this organization heroically over the last few decades.
You're most welcome. Most welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Franklin. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.